everybody. This is Pastor Brady Henderson of the First Baptist Church of Gaston, and I am blessed to be able to serve as a senior pastor here at my favorite church in the Midlands. We are here today for episode 52 of the Menorah podcast. And last three episodes, Alan and I talked a little bit about my 4-year anniversary here at the church, and we talked about that. We just want to take a little break from that, maybe for this week only, maybe for next week too, because we have a special guest here who we're going to be interviewing today. Alan, it has been quite a while since we have done an interview, so I'm actually pretty excited that we get to have one again. And so we are seated today with Stafford Johnson. So what are your opening thoughts on that, Alan?
You're right. It is good to kind of do something out of the ordinary. It's good to have Stafford with us, and maybe as time goes on, we can get a few more people through.
For sure. Hey, Stafford, thank you so much for joining us today. It just kind of worked out to where you and I visited the hospitals earlier today, and of course, at the time we're recording this, the ladies are meeting tonight, and as far as I know, all our wives are going to be there, so we have extra time that we wouldn't usually have. And that's no disrespect to our wives. We love you very much. We get to talk to you, Stafford, and so just want to ask you a few questions today. Some of our listeners are going to fall on one of two sides of the tracks. Either they know exactly who you are and have since birth, or they have known you in the last little bit because they're new members or whatever the case may be. So, like I said, thank you for taking the time to be on here. So I just kind of want to kick it off. Just tell us a little bit about who you're married to, who your dependent son is, who that is, and who your parents are. Tell us a little bit about your family, and then maybe we'll get into some more specifics.
All right. Well, thank y'all for having me. It's always good to sit back and be able to talk. Well, yeah, like you said, my name is Stafford Johnson. I grew up in the Gaston, Swansea area. So my wife is Kaylin Johnson, for those that, go to the church, and she's on the praise team and does a lot as well.
And by the way, let me pause on the praise team. When I first heard her sing a few weeks ago, it's probably been a few months now, I didn't act in the pastoral way that I should have. I should have just sat there nicely and worshiped, but my jaw was, my jaw was on the ground, and I was like, wow, how does that voice? I was like, whoa, I had no idea.
How do you keep that a secret for so long?
Yeah, how do you keep that a secret? I baptized her, Easter of 2022?
Yep.
And I'm just now finding out in 2025?
It's like all these people that stand by her during the hymns are kind of holding out on us.
Yeah, so anyway, so sorry to interrupt. But
you're good, you're good. She loves to sing, and that's one of those things that I think she was kind of nervous about, and as time's going on at church, she's felt comfortable, and that's a good thing. So, but yeah, like you said, my dependent, I have a son, Nathan, who's just turned 3, and he's a gift, God's gift to us, and a joy. And then my parents, like I said, I grew up in Gaston. My parents have been members of the church for a long time. My dad's served for a deacon as long as I can remember, Dwayne and Jackie Johnson. Been going here often. I took a little detour, I guess you could say, in my life, but I grew up in this church and have been back now for about 3 years.
Yeah.
Regularly.
About right.
So.
Yeah, close to 3 years, and so it's really neat for Alan and I. Alan and I have served with your dad many years now. Me specifically 4, Alan longer than that. Just think the world of your dad. He's one of my personal best friends, not just in the church but in general. Great guy. It's so interesting, and I think you'll agree with me here, Alan. Stafford and Dwayne are two totally different people.
Yep.
But if you see them walking down the hall, the mannerisms, whoa, it will blow you away, some of the facial expressions. So, and I've picked up on that. But anyway, so Stafford, I know you mentioned you grew up here and everything, and I think it's really cool that you did. You came in on the Deacon class this past September. One of those was a new believer in Troy, who obviously didn't grow up in church. The other one was Noel, who did grow up here but was gone for a while. And then yours kind of same way, grew up here, gone for a while. So, just talk a little bit about, I guess first, how did you come to know Jesus? What's your salvation story?
I came to know Jesus when I was in first grade. I was in Miss Janice Bolt and Miss Kathy Stabler's Sunday school class. And I remember coming forward, and then pretty much that was it. It was, it clicked. I knew And I had actually a year prior, I had talked to mom and dad about it, and had told them that I wanted to have a relationship with Jesus, and that they wanted to make sure. So we waited and continued to plant the seeds and let them grow. And then that kind of started being more involved, and I got involved in RAs
Yeah.
and was Camp McCall every year,
Yeah. Yeah.
and came up through a youth group. Matter of fact, at 12 years old, I knew God was calling me to do something with ministry, whether it be, I didn't know what it was at the time, and now we've talked about that. I believe it's working. That's why working with the RAs now,
Mm-hmm.
that I tend to get along well with children. I just have a knack for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the gifts God's given me.
God bless you.
Yes, that is something that not everybody is given, and I'm gonna tell you, I tried my best at RAs for a long time, and I had my mentor was Terry Pound. He and I served together for a while, and he tried his best to bring me along, and I just never could really grasp it.
Well, and I think that goes to a little bit of what Stafford's talking about as far as, we're all called to a certain ministry. And I know on this podcast, we've covered your calling, Alan, with, media. And I mean, our media team has absolutely taken off and doing great things. But, yeah, that's awesome. And I would also say the ministry of a deacon is a calling. So, Stafford, I remember the opening conversations you and I had about it. Obviously, the way that we do deacon elections, that's a bad term for it. Deacon selections is really how we do it now. Yes, the church does vote, but myself and whoever the chairman of deacons is at the time select those men that we feel like, number one, are biblically qualified, but number two, are spiritually mature. Because we don't ever want it to become a popularity contest. Anybody can win that. We want it to be what it was in the New Testament church in Acts, where they were appointed. And so, obviously, you and I had that conversation. So, you've been back for several years now. You're raising your son now. So, way back in August, when you and I had that conversation, I remember some of the poignant things that I said to you. What was going? I've never asked you this before. Surprise. So, what kind of was going on in your mind when I first engaged you about that conversation? Because somebody who's grown up here and has seen good, bad, and ugly, that had to be a flood of emotions. So, just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, so you said growing up here and seeing good, bad, and ugly. That that goes two sides to that story. Of the first thing is I was surprised and terrified that, because being growing up here, a lot of the people in the church and in the community have seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of me.
Yeah.
And a lot of them knew parts of my story, and still only know parts of my story.
Mm-hmm.
Because unless you get to talk to me and get to know me, you won't know the full story. I mean, and everybody talks. So it was definitely a shock in one way that, hey, the people of the church body, has obviously seen enough growth in me to say, okay, hey, you know what, he fits this. He is qualified. And I was honored. And then a lot of also seeing the good, the bad, and the ugly, and growing up, I had said before, if I was going to be a deacon, like if I was ever called to be a deacon, and that was ever going to be a thing, that I was going to do it right. I didn't want to be somebody that just sat back and watched, or an armchair. I wanted to, if I was going to accept that role, I wanted to be able to be involved, to where, hey, not only am I going to be involved in other aspects of the church, but I am going to be, trying to be keyed in and not let my personal life, as far as work and everything else, swamp me from fulfilling those duties. Because
Gotcha.
it is a balance, especially being a new father.
Oh, yeah.
And learning all the roles that I'm still learning and adjusting to. So I knew that it would be an adjustment. So just a lot of different. And then the one that honestly wasn't even an issue was, being Southern Baptist and deacons and serving as deacons, we don't drink.
Yeah.
And for a long time, that had been a huge part of my life, even social. I mean, I love Carolina football. Nothing, sitting in front of the TV watching, doing that, and, that it became normal in my life. And that was one of the first things I prayed about was, hey, I've always said that wouldn't be an issue to give it up, and it wasn't. And I don't miss it, and I actually became more self-aware of a lot of other issues with that. And that's that everybody has their own convictions, and everybody's is convicted in different ways. But I've been self-aware of a lot of things of that nature when it comes to that topic, since I just basically said, hey, I'm not doing it anymore, not going to be around it.
Yep.
So.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, that's a great testimony. And one thing that was interesting about that process, about you becoming a deacon, that Dwayne is somebody that Alan mentions, Terry being his mentor. I would say Dwayne is one of mine, and just very helpful. We get along real well. And I remember when we had the conversation, and in Dwayne-like fashion, Alan knows what I'm talking about. He goes, well, that's your decision. I won't have nothing to do with it, because it's his son. And I think that's admirable for several reasons, and I'm bringing that up for a specific point. In Baptist history, that has not always been the case. And I'm not talking about our church. I mean Baptist church across the South. And Alan, you've spoken about this before. People want their children to be deacons, and their so-and-so to grow up and be deacons. And so a lot of fathers in that spot, not all, a lot would say, oh, yeah, he's ready. I want him. Instead of, Pastor, I trust you. You make the decision. I don't want to have anything to do with it. And so that showed me a lot of humility in Dwayne, but also, that he trusts me enough. And I know this is weird because I'm saying it in front of him, but to evaluate his son. And I think that is a lesson not just for you, Stafford, but I also think about Troy and Noel, who, like you, have a son. And like you, are raising their son in this church, and like you, have the potential of those children growing up and being leaders one day. Maybe not deacons, but leaders in the church. And I remember one Sunday morning I made the joke about Hunter Peel being the chairman of deacons one day. It was a joke, but it wasn't a joke. And what I mean by that is I'm not prophesying that Hunter is going to be that. I'm not. He's a first grader. Okay. I'm not saying that's going to happen. But what I'm saying is, we have to start thinking as a church that these guys are going. We've got to train them now.
We have to pick them out. We have to mark them against the world.
That's
and
right.
We have to raise them in such a way that they will be leaders one day.
And I think Dwayne and Jackie did that with Stafford.
Agreed.
And also with Leanne. She's at First Baptist Columbia serving and everything. Don't want to leave her out. So, anyway, so I thought that was really neat when Dwayne just said, you know what, look, we can decide about the other ones, me and you, but you're going to have to do that one. And that was a really humbling thing. And what was really interesting about his deacon class is that we've gone all the way back in the archives. It's the youngest deacon class since like 1963. And on 1963 is when 21-year-old Terry Pound was ordained and 29-year-old Hayward Kelly. Now, I want you to think about that. Hayward, I love you, buddy, but you about to be 90 this year. Okay, so 1963 was a long time ago. But just venture with me for a moment there to think about that. And Alan, your dad was in his 30s when that happened. And so 30s or 40s. And so to think about that shows me like those new deacons, those young deacons are a symbol of a new era. And I think that's really cool to be able to look at and to be able to see.
Well, yeah, it's a benchmark, and one thing, if you look at the years of experience on our deacon board, even with the new guys, we're still pretty high.
Yeah.
There's a lot of
AKA older.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I know I can't speak for anybody else, but I can speak for myself, and I'm currently, as we are recording this, I'm 63 years old, and I know that I'm slowing down. I don't have the physical stamina I used to, and I'm not nearly as mentally sharp as I used to be. I can't any longer can I multitask and juggle 3 different things in my mind at once. I got to kind of move on from things, and oftentimes you have to do that as leaders in a church.
Yeah, Exactly, and that's where problems over the years, not just our church, but all churches have occurred, is when people that no longer need to be serving continue to hold on to a role that they no longer need to be doing that. And that's the hard thing about church ministry is, somebody getting that realization. And here's the thing, as many times as people may tell you that, you have to come to that realization. God has to reveal that to you.
My dad wrestled with he taught Sunday school, was one of his things, and he struggled with keeping stuff in his mind. He knew what he wanted to say.
Yeah.
He just couldn't get it out in a fluid manner, and it bothered him a lot. The last year he taught, he wrestled with that because he felt like that, that was his responsibility to prepare and work on that lesson, and then he felt like he wasn't doing it justice.
Yeah. Yeah. So we mentioned some of that about the junior class, and what it reminds me of, Stafford, what's really interesting, I mean, Troy's the youngest of the group, you're the middle, and then Noel's, I hope Noel's listening, the old guy, even though he's really not. And what's interesting, when I first came, Josh Stabler was the young guy, and then he had just accepted it, and he had been it before previously, and then accepted it again. And then I said, well, who's the next youngest? And Mike's like me. Saying himself that he was the youngest, and I was like, oh, well, hello, Mike. You know what I mean? So anyway, but it's just really awesome to kind of see that right now in the life of our church. So we've got a lot more stuff we're going to ask Stafford. We are going to save that for next Thursday, which I believe is the last day in February. So we're going to make that a part 2. Yep, it is. It's the next to last day. February 28th is the last day. So stick around for next week and episode 53, and we will talk to you, Stafford, again then. So hang on tight. Thank you guys so much for listening to the Menorah Podcast. For those that are not familiar, the Menorah Podcast is a podcast that seeks to share light, speak the light, and send the light of Jesus Christ all across the airwaves of the internet. This has been episode 52 on February 20th of 2025, and this is part 1 of an interview with Deacon Stafford Johnson. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you next week.